A very good afternoon. Welcome to the market segment. Asian stocks were mostly subdued today, although Hong Kong and mainland China markets ended the session in positive territory, with a jump in the Alibaba share said to have boosted the Hang Seng Index on the back of the release of positive results. Stocks in Jakarta in Indonesia recorded a 2% decline. This as protest action continued as ordinary folk out there are complaining about the high cost of living. The Nikkei share average declined by 1.24%. The Hang Seng Index jumped by 2.15%, while the Shanghai Composite Index gained 0.5%. US stocks closed lower on Friday, with the S&P 500 retracing from record highs as persistent inflation pressures weighed on sentiment. Core PCE, that is the Federal Reserve's preferred inflation gauge, rose by 2.9% year-on-year in July. This was in line with expectation, but the fastest pace of growth since February. The Dow Jones Industrial Average declined by 0.2%. The S&P 500 fell by 0.64%, while the Nasdaq Composite Index tumbled by 1.15%. Looking at local indicators now, we see that the all-share index is currently trading up 0.6% at 102,458 index points. The local unit is trading at 17.56 against the US dollar, 20.58 vis-a-vis the euro, and 23.76 against the British pound. Looking at commodities, we see that gold is trading at $3,471 an ounce, platinum at $1,390 an ounce, while Brent crude oil is trading at $68.07 a barrel. All right, let's get into it with James Turp. He's the head of investment strategy and fixed income. He's a fixed income portfolio manager as well at Sanlam Investments. Thank you so much, James, for joining us. So it's the beginning of a new month where we get a lot of global data, particularly around the manufacturing and services industries. What else do you expect to be moving markets this week?
Thanks very much for having me, Nompu. And a big one this week is the labor data coming out of the US. We've got to wait till Friday for that. But of course, the big story at the moment in global markets is the Federal Reserve or the Federal Bank over in the US and whether they're going to cut interest rates in September or not. Now, we know that they're in the Jackson Hole, Fed Chair Powell gave a hint that he was moving towards an interest rate cut. And we know, as you say, the inflation is still in the US economy, but will jobs data this Friday confirm that it is weak? Remember, the last release had big revisions lower. So we're going to look at the headline jobs added, and we're going to look at the previous revisions. And I think that lines us up for the FOMC later this month, a day before our own MPC meeting.
Yeah, so we know that the South African Reserve Bank always tells us that it looks at data when it makes its call on interest rates. But what do you expect them to do? Might they be influenced by what the Fed decides the day before?
Yeah, that's a tricky one to answer. Of course, they dropped the bombshell, didn't they, with the inflation target, hugely topical here in South Africa, dropping where they will be targeting inflation from 4.5% to 3% and adjusting their forecasts for inflation and, more importantly, perhaps for interest rates. And so typically, you'd expect interest rates would need to remain higher to get inflation lower and to influence those expectations. So desperately needed to get inflation lower too. But if they're a day after the Fed, a Fed that comes across dovish and cuts interest rates, the coin's actually in the air, to be honest, on whether they should follow through and cut as well. I think it's probably unlikely, given that they have cut and that they've adjusted this target lower. And with all of the volatility in global markets at the moment, it's not being priced, which is important. So the Fed is priced for a 25 basis point cut. The SAB isn't. We are priced for almost 2 further cuts, but that's going to play out over the next year. So probably not Nompu, but you never know. With all of that data to come beforehand, the picture could change quite quickly.
Yeah. So I see that the gold price is trying to flirt with that all-time high that it achieved earlier this year, $3,500 an ounce. Does that suggest that market players are still, tentative and uncertain about the future?
It does. It certainly does. There's so many moving parts. You've got to think about the uncertainty around the Fed with legal challenges, with Fed voting members being removed. And you've also got this matter of the tariffs in the US coming through the appeals court now, and that's been put off under challenge. So there's all this uncertainty on whether tariffs actually go ahead in the form that they have taken, whether they double down. We just don't know. And all of that uncertainty plays out and leads to these risk-off asset classes performing. So you're quite right. There's all this uncertainty out there. Saying that, though, volatility indices are coming down slightly compared to where they've been. So we're getting our heads around it, but it's never going to be easy with all of these uncertainties out there still.
And one last thing, just around the tariffs. Obviously, they kicked in properly at the beginning of August. Is it only perhaps at the beginning of October that we can properly reflect on their impact, particularly for the US consumer?
That's it. Yeah, exactly. So with this challenge as well, they're expected to only know the outcome that comes out in October. So you're quite right in saying that, Nompu. Of course, for us as South Africans, we're still waiting to hear where our tariff level actually settles. So that coin is still in the air on that as well. We've worked out that it sits around 18-19% when you take all of the items that get tariff relief into consideration, but it takes a considerable amount off our pretty difficult GDP here in South Africa as it is. So any good news there would be welcome. It's hard to read it at the moment. They're giving nothing away. We're getting no feedback from the South African ministers that are over there working on that. So that leads to some uncertainty here. We kind of know the worst case scenario, you would think. So maybe there's a glimmer of hope if we do make some headway. We don't know where we stand at the moment, though.
All right. Thank you so much, James, for your time and insights. As always, that was James Turpie, the head of investment strategy and fixed income portfolio manager at Sanlam Investments.